Identity is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. And it emerges in the intersection of human needs and environment. Abraham Maslow illustrated and outlined a hierarchy of human needs: survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, and realizing one's personal gifts, bringing those out into the world, and becoming part of something bigger than ourselves, transcendence. In survival, we have the reptilian brain. In transcendence, we have the transcendent brain. In love and belonging, we have the empathic brain. These are human needs, as much as oxygen or anything else. And as such, the environment determines the pleasure and pain pattern of the psyche. So who we each are as individuals comes from taking the vastness of the possibility field of the psyche and then deleting and cutting away until the individual remains. And what is cut away and what is left and what is developed is determined by the pleasure and pain, the honor, the dishonor, and silence pattern of the outer environment. So possibility fields are much like vision fields. They're always spherical or circular. If you can see a mile with 20/20 vision in front of you, if you turn around, you can see a mile behind you. You can see a mile to the left. So possibility fields are circular, but environments in the form of cultures or cults are not circular. Every cult in human history has elevated certain traits and demonized other traits. And in the 10,000 cults in human history, just about every cult has been self-referential in its elevation and demonization of various traits. A square cult leads to a square identity as the individual within the energy field of the individual seeks to find the path of least resistance over time to fulfilling human needs, particularly survival, security, love and belonging, and self-esteem. Now, in a pack mammalian species, one's survival odds go way up with collaboration and cooperation with the pack. Monkeys last longer in a pack when they can alert each other of predators, help get ticks out of each other's hair, massage each other, mate, etc., find good food sources, alert one another. Monkeys survive longer and easier in packs. So it is integral to survival to connect. In this case, with the pack of monkeys, in a human case, with one's cult. Security of survival, again, increases with the pack. And importantly, you need cooperation not to violate. Because in our culture, any single person with a gun can kill you. Out of 7 billion people, any of them with a gun and a single-minded intention can kill you. So collaboration to diffuse violation is a really important part of that. And it's important to understand that all cults are self-referential, meaning they define themselves by themselves. It's referred to as our way of life. Now, our way of life is by definition different from every other cult. Otherwise, it wouldn't be ours, right? We define ourselves by difference. So somewhere in Africa, they're measuring our way of life and the status and rank of our way of life by how big of a plate you can get into the intersection of the lip. Somewhere else in Africa, they're measuring womanhood with genital mutilation and removing the clitoris. In the United States, our way of life involves cutting off the foreskin of a male penis for no particular reason other than that it's our way of life. A childhood trauma without consent, without clear medical backing, because it is our way of life. We build houses too big for us and then worry about cleaning them. Meanwhile, we're lonely and don't do anything about it. Why? Is it intelligent? No, it's our way of life. We get fat, but our way of life is apple pie and sugar and sitting in front of a TV, and no one's going to tell us what to do. So cults are self-referencing. They define themselves and by the past of themselves, and with the idea of perpetuating their identity, perpetuating their stereotypical patterns of thought, speaking, feeling, and action. Over time, environmental forces overshadow willpower. What I mean by that is sociologists measure a limited quantity of willpower that can be used to buck the environment for a certain period of time. But that burst of willpower wears down, and what remains in the semi-conscious pattern of flow and exchange is the path of least resistance in one's environment. When I go to Thailand, where they smile 400 to 500% more than in the United States, I smile. Not 400 to 500% more, maybe 300% more. I adapt my identity in a different cultural environment. Similarly, in Thailand, I speak less and go into less complex ideas because it's a culture that laughs at getting too much in your head. In the US, I don't go into feelings as much. Now, this is not what I want. It's who I become in a systemic environment that is rewarding very different behaviors by hundreds and hundreds of percent. And so the shape of one's cult, be it a square, be it a rectangle, be it a five-pointed star, if we look at it through the dimension of geometry, whatever the shape of the cult is, there is a statistical correlation between the cult identity and the individual identity. And nowhere is that more true than traveling around the world and being able to spot the American as the one most likely to be telling everyone about who they are as a free individual, which, much like in The Life of Brian, the spoof about you are all individuals and the chant we are all individuals. If you're really an individual, you shouldn't be able to spot that you're from a cult. And if anyone can spot the American, and it's a cult of individualism, it's not actually any more individualistic than any other cult, than any other group. It's just the cult of individualism, which is not individualistic, rather than the cult of conformity or the cult of whatever else the cult is. We're shaped tremendously by our cult. And the cult defines the easiest path to meet our human needs. It's hard to have love and belonging if you are hated and ignored, for example, if you are shamed and humiliated. You need cooperation for love and belonging. It's hard to have self-esteem when everyone around you is defining your traits, whatever they may be, as low-ranking, and the cult's traits, whatever they may be, as high-ranking. It's difficult to meet one's human needs in a certain identity in an environment that is hostile towards that identity. And because all cults primarily exist to perpetuate themselves, to perpetuate the identity of the cult, regardless of the stupidity or the intelligence of that identity. The thing that is rewarded is conformity, is whatever perpetuates the status quo. Now, it's important to understand the leverage that the cult has, and it comes in the form of human state. So the environment influences the individual, and the individual influences the environment. But the environment is much bigger than the individual. If you think of the environment as the circle or the community, and the individual as the point, the community, the circle, the feminine, is far more powerful than the point, the isolated masculine individual, because it's 1 against thousands, 1 against 50. When you try and change the norm, the status quo in a cult, you are met with instinctive withdrawal, gossip, judgment, criticism, withdrawal of funds. You've got withdrawal of attention, don't come near me. You've got withdrawal of money, I'm not going to invest in you. You've got withdrawal of status, I'm not going to give you a degree. Why? Because your thesis doesn't conform with the current norm. So there's a withdrawal in the various ways that a cult measures support. Less attractive partners, less social engagement, less money, less rank, less access to power, whatever it is. These are levers. And these levers of cult reinforcement integrate with human state. And the way human state works is it's a continuum. It's a continuum of well-being. Every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to feel sustainably good, and every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to avoid feeling chronically bad. And the environment has a tremendous influence on the individual's feeling of good or bad. And on the state continuum, down at the bottom of the state, you have helpless. It's a terrifying, miserable point on the human continuum of states. Helpless, invisible, unloved, hated, violated, and in the unknown terrain, boundless, undefined, unspoken, in the realm of the unknown. Now, people can bear to feel this, a little bit. They can be helpless but known, and I'll add lonely in there. They can be hated but visibly hated. In the process of learning regulation and maturing, for example, a child will always choose to be hated over invisible to some extent. Because if they're completely invisible, they can't learn regulating skills. You can learn to regulate energy, which is a key survival and security trait. If you are hated, and thus very visible, and if you are given consistent feedback around why and how you are hated, and if you do more of this, you're hated more, and if you do less of this, you're hated less, you can learn regulating talent, which is essential to any relationship. If you are loved and seen, you can learn regulating talent. Loved a little more if you do this, loved a little less if you do that. You can learn regulating talent. If you are invisible and hated, you cannot learn regulating talent. So usually a child will find out if they cannot earn any love because of the incompetence of the environment, they will find something that pushes enough buttons, that triggers or traumatizes enough people that they get engagement. And once they've got engagement, then they can learn regulating ability. And once they've learned regulating ability, then they can start being a little bit more discerning about the impact they want to have. But you can't have a predictable impact until you have regulating talent. So a child will choose to be hated and engage rather than be invisible and not engaged and not hated and just not seen. This is basic psychology. Now, as you move up the continuum, you've got powerful, respected, loved, rewarded, welcome, honored, and known. So, with welcome, you've got love and belonging. With honored, you've got a sense of self-esteem. With known, again, a sense of self-esteem. Respected and powerful, you've got survival and security. And so up at these higher states, you are meeting a lot of your human needs. No highly powerful, loved, respected person goes without food and shelter, etc., because you're not really that powerful if you don't have access to a safe, legal place to sleep. You're not really that powerful if you can't feed yourself. So with power, power is defined by the ability to meet one's human needs and have those human needs be met. So this is up at the high point of the state. Now, the way that cults control identity is by deciding which identities are treated to the toxicity of a low state of helpless, invisible, unloved, hated, violated, and unknown. So, for example, in a chauvinistic culture where femininity is a sign of weakness, lower rank, inferiority, and shame, if you express sensitive feelings, these feelings are dishonored. They're pushed through. They're violated. So if you say, gee, it really hurts my feelings that you're doing that, the response in a chauvinistic environment is to push through that feeling as if it doesn't exist. Meaning, in our environment, who you are does not exist. Now, how this retrains the person to identify as an insensitive person is the following. They say, but I did have this feeling and I did say it. So they're speaking sensitively, clearly. They're speaking, they're doing, they're thinking, and they're feeling in a sensitive, feminine way. Male or female doesn't matter. But they are having that identity, the identity of the sensitive, feminine one, routinely shamed, violated, dishonored, hated, humiliated, and without any support or power. So they feel helpless to sustain the identity. It's like a tree that every time it shoots up a shoot, a mower comes along and cuts it off before it can become a redwood. The environment is hostile to that tree, so it cannot develop that identity with dignity and power. So to be a sensitive individual in a chauvinistic cult environment is to feel helpless, invisible, unloved, hated, violated, and unknown. Human beings cannot tolerate that extreme compounding mix of characteristics as a human state for very long. So what happens is a migration of identity. The sensitive little boy who is told that boys are not sensitive, who is laughed at when he is sensitive, who is shamed and pushed at and bullied because he is sensitive, has a violated identity in the chauvinistic environment of the cult. No support and extreme violation. Now, if the child says, that's me, I am the one, see, because that's the issue with identity, is we identify with them. If the child says, I am hated, unloved, violated, invisible, and in some unknown terrain that doesn't seem to exist, this is intolerable, because the mathematical actions consistent with that belief structure are suicide, are self-loathing, which means not meeting one's human need to survive, to feel secure, love and well-being, etc. So normally, the identity shifts, meaning if I am the one who is hated and unloved, and that leads me to want to kill myself, hurt myself, mutilate myself, hate myself, no, I don't want to feel that way. So then you look around and you say, what identity, what pattern of thought, words, feeling, and action is powerful, respected, loved, rewarded, welcome, honored, and known? And if you see, well, making chauvinistic jokes as a young man, sexual conquest as a young man, fuck you to authority as a young man, whatever it is that you see is powerful, respected, loved, rewarded, welcome, honored, and known, then you shift your pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing to be complicit with the identity that is most rewarded. And what does the cult reward? The reenactment of itself. It's very interesting to watch parents, because if you pay attention to a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 10-year-old, you will often see a caricature of one or both parents in that child. And the caricature is almost always absurd, because every parent is to some degree conforming with their cult. And of the 10,000 cults estimated by anthropologists to have exist, almost none of them hold up on pure metrics of intelligence. I mean, is it intelligent that in the last 200 years, the average American will consume 200 times more natural resources than any other cult in human history? So in 200 years ago, if you took the per capita consumption of natural resources compared to today, you see more than 100 times increase in consumption at the same time, with the global population explosion. Well, is that intelligent? To quadruple, to exponentially increase the size of the population and exponentially improve the rate of environmental consumption simultaneously. 2 exponential waves converging in this kind of graph that just goes off the charts as we come into the last 100 years in particular. Is that intelligent? No, it's what we do because that's who we are, because that's what we do, because that's who we are. We are the ones who consume as much as possible. That's our identity. Now, what's interesting is that the more traumatized a cult is, the more traumatized an individual is, the more they enter the transcendent brain through violence. So the transcendent brain is entered through ecstasy, a sense of going beyond the self freely and willingly into participate into something much bigger than the self, the larger planet, the God, Goddess, all that is, the mathematical field of energy, something bigger than the self. And when that is done willingly and freely, through respect and ritual and dance and all the various ways that cults throughout history have accessed transcendent states, when that's done willingly, it's called ecstasy, ecstasis. When it's done violently, shockingly, and unwillingly, it's called pain and it's called trauma. Now, both trauma and ecstasy take you beyond the limits of the ego. Trauma takes you beyond by flooding you with a timeless wave of pain and terror that is so big it dwarfs the self and terrifies the ego. Ecstasy does it by loving and caring for the ego to such an extent that the reptilian brain lets go of its hooks, the mammalian brain lets go of its hooks, the rational brain lets go of its hooks, and the empathic and transcendent brain catapult the consciousness into an awareness of the interconnectedness of all things, which mathematically and in the science of physics is an intact perception. Every single thing, according to physicists, is linked inextricably to every other thing. There is no energy that is created or destroyed. It only changes form in a vast dance that is connected by common rhythms, by common habits, by common laws across billions of light years. Meaning there's a connection between the behavior of an atom in this pinky and the behavior of an atom billions of light years away. There's a connection in the gravitational field on this planet and on Mars. There is an inextricable theme of interconnectivity between every unit of energy in the known multiverse and every other unit of known energy and unknown energy in the multiverse. That's the law of physics. And the transcendent brain is the one part of human consciousness. It's the one part of human physiology that allows us to witness the reality of that mathematical equation. And when it happens through ecstasis, psychedelics, dance, breathing, tantric lovemaking, chanting, circling, ritual, meditation, when it happens through ritualized ecstasy, we access that endogenous DMT in the brain naturally and wholly. And when it's done traumatically, clumsily, violently, we are hit with a wave of energy that is so big it dwarfs the ego. And we are reduced down to fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. We bow down to the terror of the pain of obliteration. Of obliterating what? We're not obliterating energy. We're obliterating identity. When the police of your own government break down your door and destroy your family and destroy your company and destroy your way of life, what they're taking from you is not energy. No energy is created or destroyed. They're taking identity. They're taking control of your identity over by force. You think you're a philosopher reading a book. You think you're a spiritual seeker taking a psychedelic mushroom. No, you're not. You are our prisoner. And you will think, speak, feel, and behave the way we dictate. And if you do not, we will kill you. We will destroy. We will eradicate. The Chinese, as they go into Tibet, burning and destroying what? Not the land, not the energy. The identity of the Tibetan people. So when they're most identified with their temples, If you destroy the temples, you've destroyed the thought pattern, the speaking pattern, the feeling pattern, and the action pattern around the temples. This is a trauma. It takes every Tibetan into the helpless, invisible, unloved, hated, violated, unknown state that human beings cannot bear and cannot stand. So they look around. Who can we become that would be powerful, that would be respected, loved, rewarded, welcome, honored, and known? It's quite simple. You can become the Chinese cult. You can reject the Tibetan cult, and you can become like us. You can focus on money rather than temples. You can focus on family ranking rather than Buddhism. You can focus on this pattern of thinking, feeling. And that's really what's being fought. Every single conflict between human beings is a conflict of identity. It's not a conflict of energy. If energy is not created or destroyed but just changes form, it's going to be some form or other, no matter what. If a cult was not attached to its identity, and an invading force said, "We don't want you to be talking like this, we want you to be talking like this." And everyone said, "Sure, we'll just change our identity." So how do you want us to talk? How do you want us to have sex? When do you want us to, how do you want us to dress? Sure, we'll just change our identity. There's no conflict. But we are attached to our identity. The reason that every cult is self-referential and works hard to maintain the status quo in order to perpetuate itself is that the more traumatized we are as a species, as a planet, as individuals, and as a culture, the more frightened we are of the unknown. Because all trauma arrives on the doorstep through the gateway of the unknown. And it's worth knowing that 99.9% of all reality is unknown. It's not only unknown, it's unknown. It's so unknown we don't know that we don't know it. You see, within the dimensions of the observing and measuring devices of the five senses, and it's worth noticing that if nobody had eyes, if no person had eyes, and if no animals had eyes, the light spectrum would not exist to us. Now, it's also worth noting that if you don't have a sylph, you see, a sylph is a sense that counts the number of right angles and the amount of time in mims between encountering right angles. There is a sense that counts that you don't have. So you don't know how many right angles you encountered today. And you don't know the duration of mims in between each encounter. Because mims isn't part of your vocabulary as a time unit. Your cult invented another time unit called seconds. But you don't even know that either because you don't have a sense that sends an alert to your brain every time you see a right angle. That doesn't mean that sense doesn't exist, it just means you don't have it. The vastness of reality is reduced to the observing and measuring devices we have to measure it, to our sense of dimensionality. But there are infinite dimensions to measure an infinite number of objects in an infinite amount of space. And most of it we don't know that we don't know. And we don't want to know what we don't know. And we don't want to face the unknown because shock, because trauma arrives through the gateway of the unknown. And in a low-level cult, in a low level of reactivity, the response to that information is to put our heads in the sand and bury ourselves in our cult. And the reason that there have been 10,000 cults in human history and most of them do not survive is that every single cult is wrong. Every single cult has gotten large parts of the template for interacting with reality dead wrong. The cults that cut off tips of male penises, the cults that cut off clitorises, the cults that mutilate the lips and put in plates, the cults that enslave women, the cults that sell children into prostitution are not intelligent. Intelligence is measured by the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. No cult is 100% efficient. But we're not even intelligent enough to measure the intelligence of our cult. The most valuable thing a cult could teach us in kindergarten, middle school and stuff would be, here's how much time it takes you to go to school. Here's how much money it costs to send you to school. Here's how many trees and stuff that we cut down to first clear the site for the school, then build the school, then drive you back and forth to school, and then power the school. So this is the equation of energy consumed to send you to this building. And this is the recipe we've designed that we call school. This is the curriculum. This curriculum will not teach you how to drive, will not teach you how to open a checking account, will not teach you how to cook, will not teach you how to resolve a fight with your wife, will not teach you how to avoid abusing your child, will not teach you how to repair the intergenerational abuse of your family. It's not going to teach you anything really useful in life. But it will teach you the dates when bridges were constructed in the 1800s, will teach you the names of kings and the names of dead people. It's going to teach you that. And we're going to spend all this time and money so that you can learn this, and you're going to forget it immediately because the brain evicts all knowledge that is not relevant to its well-being. And when the bridge was built, and whether it was in 1854 or 1855, has nothing to do with your well-being, which is why you're going to forget it as soon as the test is taken. So this is not intelligent. The most valuable thing a cult could teach is intelligence. And the most intelligent thing to do is to analyze one's cult in relationship to intelligence and cross-reference it with other cults, past and present, that have spent less energy to deliver more sustainable human well-being. Now, this is an inevitable cause-effect equation. Cults create identities. Large masses of identities create pain, pleasure, reward systems, and people conform statistically to what's rewarded in their cult. So this just goes on and on and on and on, right? It's a mathematical tailspin, which dooms every cult. I mean, why have most of the cults in human history gone extinct? Because they failed. Why will our cult, as it is defined today, go extinct? Because it is failing us. It's an incompetent response to reality. So it will change into something that's more intelligent, or it will die out, one of the two. Because that is how evolution works. It's the same with churches. You see, go spend time every Sunday in a dreary, dark, cold building and listen to guilt tripping from a dead guy 2,000 years ago and be threatened with hell and pain and blah, blah, blah if you don't give money to these pedophilic priests who are going to prey on your children in God's name. That doesn't work anymore, right? So the churches that are still growing have shifted to positivity, for example, which is an evolutionary step from fear, you'll go to hell if you don't do whatever we say and give us a lot of money, to positivity, praise the Lord, bring gratitude into your life. So it's an evolutionary step. You've got more well-being with joy and gratitude than you do misery. So the churches that are growing are changing so radically that you couldn't recognize them 200 or 300 years ago. You know, the priests 200 or 300 years ago, the churches that are really doing well today, all the 300-year-old priests, and they're all men, of course, because that's one of the things that hasn't changed, which is very boring. I'm sure there'd be a lot more attendance if there were vivacious, amazing women in front of the pulpits talking about interesting topics. But, so that those churches that are boring and male-dominated are dying out, as they should, as our cult will. So a cult will change and evolve, or it will die. It will be consumed by another cult that's more interesting, that brings more human well-being per unit of energy invested. And science, that's really the promise of the cult of science. That if you study and make predictions that are accurate, you'll spend less energy to get what you want. And to the degree that the cult of science delivers on that promise, the cult of science is in ascendancy. To the degree that it gives people meaningless, boring lives that don't focus on interpersonal relationships, etc., it will decline. Because the obvious realization to any billionaire, highly educated scientist is that all the billions in the world do not give you love and belonging. But you get some of it. You get high rank in a cult that is scientific. You'll get more rank if you've got a scientific degree. Now, this tailspin, what interrupts this tailspin on an individual level? So when your parents like it when you cry, so you cry more, and then they hurt you some more because they like you when you cry, and you cry more. And what interrupts this cycle of just mindless repetition? Transcendence. Because the possibilities field is spherical, the cult is square, the identity that conforms to the cult is square, which means butchering off parts of the possibility field, which means a loss in grace. Square wheels are bumpy rides. Round wheels, possibility fields, are graceful rides. So transcendence is what interrupts the cycle. Transcendence, consciousness, is that which exists between stimulus and response, in the gap. So a highly conscious person feels this based on their environment and is about to act inconsistent with what they feel based on their environmental reward system, but thinks about it, edits the script. Now the question is, where does the energy in the mathematical equation of change, where does the energy come from to intercept the individual cult identity loop, where the cult does this and the individual does this and the cult does this and the individual does this, and it just goes round and round? Where does the energy come from to interrupt that endless loop? Take feudal warfare. Whoever hurts your family has got to be avenged. avenged must take place by killing at least as many people as were killed in the war, in your family. So someone accidentally banged their horse into one of your family members and killed them one day. That was 500 years ago. And then ever since, you've gone out and killed one of their people, and then next year they come and get one of yours, and then you kill two, and then they kill three, and so this just has gone on for 500 years. Where do you get change? Where do you get evolution and intelligence in this reactive dynamic of perpetuated identities? You get it from outside the set of the cult. So what is it that's outside of the cult? Now, certain Native American tribes would not consider a young man an adult or safe until they had had a transcendent experience that connected them with the mathematical equation that is the larger energy field, that connected them with the mathematical equation that is the sense of divinity perceived through the transcendent brain with endogenous DMT. They would not trust an individual as long as they were indoctrinated robots that mimicked the cult. Because every intelligent, thoughtful individual understands that their cult at some level is the biggest threat to the tribe that's ever existed. That the cult, if it stays static, will kill the very people it was formed to protect and serve. That a self-referential mechanism that says we do this because we do this, and we do this because we did this, and we did this because that's who we are, and who we are is this because that's what we did before, that is so circular. It's like drinking your own piss again and again and again. It'll kill you. It's comforting, it's familiar, it's predictable, and it'll kill you. So how do you trust someone who's being rewarded by the cult? How do you trust them? They have to have a connection with the part of themselves that is not the cult identity. That is the identity of a spiritual adult. What is a spiritual adult? It is the identity that is not limited to the body and the cult and the mind of the cult and the feelings and beliefs of the cult, but is aware of being connected to something bigger than the ego, the body, and the cult. It doesn't matter whether that is an intuitive understanding of the gravitational wave formation that connects universes, or the music of environment and human needs that has brought every song, every cult in human history into existence and will bring the end of that song so that another song can be written that's more intelligent. It doesn't matter what the transcendence is, but you are not trustworthy if your entire definition of reality is the same self-referential piss that everyone in your cult has been drinking for the last 1,000 years. You've got to let new energy into the set. It's the equivalent of letting the stream, the river, carry away your piss, dilute it, spread it into nutrients, and drinking pure fresh water. From where? From where 99.9% of reality exists, the unknown. You're drinking on the sea of the unknown, on the shores of possibility. You're facing the greatest doorway that it is possible to comprehend, the unknown, and the unknown unknown. which comprises 99.9% of all energy, of all mathematics, of all matter, no matter what dimension you examine, other than cult, which is a synthetic creation to protect us from our fear of the vastness, no matter what domain we examine, 99.9% of it is unknown. 99.9% of all sounds have never been heard by a human ear because they're outside the range of what the human ear can hear. 99.9% of all light has never been seen by human eyes. Not just because we're not there to see it, but it's outside the range at which light can be seen by human eyes. It's out there in the unknown. And once you are initiated outside the set of your cult, you are now a way shower, a unique way shower, because as the individual transcends their ego and transcends their cult, they will go someplace that no one else has ever gone before in quite that way. Why? Because when the unknown is 99.999% of all reality, the odds of you ending up in the exact same place as someone else when you venture out, when you explore, are so minuscule. You're going to go somewhere new. You're going to touch an energy field, a discovery, an invention, an idea, a feeling, a possibility, an image, an art form, a song. You're going to touch something that no one else has ever touched before. And you're going to revitalize the cell of possibility that is your cult, your family, your ego. You're going to revitalize it. You're going to bless it with an exchange of energy that is outside the set of your cult. That's going to bring new healthy stock. It's going to bring new healthy energy, new healthy paradigms to revitalize and change the status quo. And every trauma-based cult is going to kill its Christ, is going to murder the voice of change to protect itself from the fear of the unknown. And these are immature cults. And in killing the Christ, in killing the transcendent, in killing the Buddha, in killing psychedelic experiences, in killing the honesty of the innocent, the truth of the feminine, we kill our cults. We doom our cults to failure. Because all energy systems, including identities and including cult identities and individual identities, are sustained by a dynamic relationship with the whole. We think of ourselves as individual identities, like this is me, right? I'm Dane, and I'm an individual, and these are my things, and this bit is me, and it's not you, and this and that and the other. It's bullshit. If it were not for the trees around my country, I'd be dead before I finished describing who I was as an individual. If it were not for my great 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 grandparents, I'd be dead. You realize? The sperm didn't crawl up 800 years ago. The whole system forward collapses, and I don't exist. I'm dependent on what happened 800 years ago by people I don't even know. What about this outfit? It's mine, right? Bullshit. This came from the planet. And there are more than 1 million man-hours invested in this item alone. There are more than 1 billion man-hours invested in this item alone. Because for me to call this mine, money had to be invented, credit cards had to be invented, the internet had to be invented, shipping containers needed to be invented, silk had to be invented, the factory system needed to be invented, agriculture needed to be invented, forestry equipment needed. The list of what is affected to produce this one thing so easily as buy with one click now so that it can be mine. You can't find the end of this garment and the people it has touched over the last 1,000 years, let alone who invented the idea of necklace. And how is it mine that the earth 40 to 200 million years ago made a rose quartz that someone a few thousand years ago decided was a good idea to mine, that someone refined into a mining process and invented electricity? What does that have to do with me? I didn't invent electricity, diamond cutting blades, polishing, web pages, HTML script. We are an interconnected energy field beyond anything almost any of us have been taught to imagine, because our cult, in its desire to protect us from the fear of the unknown, dulls this vast equation down to this tiny little thing that says this is me and I have nothing to do with everyone else, and in doing so creates a tremendous amount of invisibility, tremendous amount of dishonor, and a tremendous amount of loneliness.